Indian behavioral sciences in the last 60 years, practically since independence, which is about 70 and odd years, have contributed a great deal to many, many sectors. I would think that the most significant contribution from behavioral sciences came in the field of agriculture. Uh, Starting with the 1950s, when the concept of extension was formulated as a mechanism of bringing development, particularly in rural India. The agriculture sector formed a large part of the GDP in those days. The farmers needed to be influenced in terms of producing better crops. So it needed a lot of innovations in the agriculture kind of a sector. So there were agriculture extension officers, village level workers, and of course subsequently it got spread to other sectors like health, education, and so on, where the term extension became very prominent. So I think the most significant impact of behavioral scientists in 50s has been in the field of extension education, in the field of agriculture. Agriculture extension departments were formed, and practically sometime in early 60s, late 50s and early 60s, I think a good number of behavioral scientists who joined the agriculture extension departments started extension education departments. These departments focused on adoption, diffusion and adoption of agricultural innovations, so that the agriculture universities and other places do a lot of work, research work, and this work gets disseminated. I think the adoption process model has been a great contribution of the agriculture extension departments. I assume it started with the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, IARI, and later spread to a number of other places. Of course, to name a few, Dr. Uday Parikh used to work with IARI, and Dr. Somnath Chattopadhyay, Dr. T.K. Maulik, Professor Y.P. Singh, then Dr. S.N. Singh, and a number of people who worked in the field of agricultural extension and made the extension education as a very important kind of a discipline. And this is a great contribution because this entire model of adoption of innovations, taking innovations to the farmers, later got adopted in many other kind of sectors, including in the corporate sector. If you look at diffusion of any innovation or adoption of any particular product, a new product uh, that has been invented by many of the corporations and so on, followed these models of diffusion of innovations. I think this is a great kind of a contribution in the field of agriculture. Next, in my view, comes the field of education. Actually, I would have put even education earlier than uh, the agriculture, but I think education takes the second important important field, starting from the National Institute of Basic Education and later the National Council of Educational Research and Training, where there was a separate department of psychological foundations of education, headed by great people and psychologists like Shiv Mitra, Perrine Mehta, and many others. I think made a lot of impact in terms of psychological testing, psychometric testing. They specialize in testing children and also setting standards for education and so on. It's not only that, I think Stephen M. Covey's work with teachers, I am told, I think if one reads Dr. Somnath Chattopadhyay's article on ISAPS, he refers to Stephen M. Uh, Corey. Uh, his work on action research, I think he introduced action research. And also the story goes along with Uday Parikh, he used to conduct at his own house tea group sessions uh, borrowing from the National Training Laboratories, Bethel, at that point of time, or the institution founded by Kurt Lewin. So, in some ways, what I understand was the action research and T group training were introduced in the National Institute of Basic Education by Stephen M. Uh, Corey. In fact, I think Uday later wrote an interesting book, Plant Change in Education, along with one Griffin. This book is still available and is quite a interesting book to read about innovations in education and so on. The field of education, therefore, has contributed quite a bit, and then behavioral scientists, I think, initiated a few things there. Later, of course, NCRT is known to have worked on achievement motivation. When Prayag Mehta worked on achievement motive in high school boys, and even subsequently after that, the Kulkarni, C.H.K. Mishra, and a whole number of others introduced programmed instruction, which is based on Skinnerian methods, and which laid foundation for much later uh, auto instructional material and things like that. So this is the second most important kind of a contribution behavioral scientists have made through the education field. Third in the series, I must say, is the contributions on developing entrepreneurship. This is made sometime in 60s when Uday Parikh, Somnath Chattopadhyay, Manohar Natkani, and a whole lot of other people joined the SIET Institute at Hyderabad. I think this particular group had created a lot of ripples. This was the time Ford consultants like Dr. Rolf Linton happened to be with them, and by the time Dr. Linton already established leadership training for youth, starting somewhere in mid 50s, I'm told, with the Aloka experience, and Rolf Linton joining C8 Institute and focusing on developing the C8 faculty and undertaking institution building activities, I think created again another set of seeds for dissemination of behavioral sciences. It was during this period, I think Dr. Uday Parikh got the bright idea of creating what nowadays is known as the Google, but he had his own form of Google by consolidating all the behavioral science research done in India. He brought out a series of books called Indian Directory of Indian Behavioral Sciences. I think these were some 3 or 4 volumes containing abstracts of all the research that has been done in behavioral sciences prior to independence and post-independence and so on. I still remember seeing some of these volumes in mid 60s. As a student, we were all fascinated by this interesting work Uday Parikh has done. Those days, remember, there was no internet, there was no Google, but Uday Parikh served as practically like what the founders of internet and Google nowadays have done. So this is another great contribution. But an equally good contribution came from the achievement motivation training with uh, uh, with David McClellan coming to C8 Institute. McClellan and Winter conducting a series of experiments on developing entrepreneurs, picking up a good number of agriculturists, and employed people, and farmers and Kammas, particularly from the Kamma community, which is supposed to be more an agriculture kind of a community, and training them in achievement motivation. And this resulted in a very interesting book called Motivating Economic Achievement, published sometime in 1967, which proved that entrepreneurial thinking can be developed and entrepreneurship can be produced or entrepreneurs can be trained. I think this was a great demonstration, and this tradition was later followed by Uday Parikh, Manohar Natkani, and so on. It is about the same time Prayag Mehta picked up the achievement motivation concepts and tried in NCRT, and he wrote a beautiful book, Achievement Motive in High School Boys, which demonstrated that through achievement motivation training, uh, the teachers can be improved to teach better, and students also can be improved in terms of their academic achievement, and so on. It's very unfortunate. I think NCRT has not followed many of the innovations by their own kind of faculty. And one of the things that happened was quite a few of the behavioral scientists, whether it is people like Prayag Mehta, who was working on achievement motivation, or Kulkarni, who was working on program instruction, ended up leaving these institutes, and whosoever invited them, they joined them. For example, Prayag joined the Institute of Mass Communication, and Kulkarni joined the National Institute of Banking, and continued their work. Uh, the Coming back to the EC8 Institute's contributions on entrepreneurship, with the successful demonstration of by David McClelland that entrepreneurial orientations can be developed through as simple as a 4 to 5 day achievement motivation training program. I think the rationale was very simple. Behavior is produced by thought. Actions are produced by thought. Thought is produced by language. If the language of people can be influenced, then their behavior can be influenced. This is the entire achievement motivation training model. And this model later on picked up. Manohar Nadkarni went to US, worked with David McClelland, and the story goes that Manohar had a phenomenal impact on developing entrepreneurship among certain weaker kind of a communities, including the blacks and so on. I think Manohar returned back sometime in 1971, if I recollect, to India, and started Behavioral Science Center. And one of the great contributions of the Behavioral Science Center, in which I think Uday Parikh, Somnath Chattopadhyay, Prayag Mehta, Jay Moja, and all of them became members, was this whole idea of developing entrepreneurship. And this led to their actually working with the government of Gujarat, and with the 4 corporations there called GIDC, GSFC, GSIC, and so on. For these 4 corporations there, doing some work in terms of developing entrepreneurial talent in organizations. This was a remarkable kind of a thing that was done, and this has been subsequently documented uh, by uh, by the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and so on. So this led to the dissemination of achievement motivation training in a big way, and development of a Gujarat model for entrepreneurship, and also led to subsequently establishment of the Entrepreneurial Development Institute of India, and so on. I think these were great contributions that were made by the team, which got socialized at the CET Institute. Um, that is on the entrepreneurship, but I must also mention it is at this point of time a group of people from CET Institute, inspired by people like Dr. Rolf Linton, and a group of people from IIM Calcutta and IIM Ahmedabad, went to national training laboratories, and they got trained in T group training. And it was during their training, I would assume between 1962 to 1965-66, they decided to set up a body parallel to the national training laboratories in India, and which gave birth to subsequently the Indian Society for Applied Behavioral Science. I will continue about the behavioral science contributions. There is so much to talk about it. These are only beginnings of the behavioral science contributions.